do so over the next few weeks. Okay, it's my privilege to turn it over to again Rav Shraga.
We start Bez Hashem, the sugi of Chazara. Chazara, suffices to say, is that you see here different chumras that break the rules, mamish break the rules of regular Hilchos Shabbos. One that would learn Siman Shin Yud Ches over there discusses what's the halacha of somebody that is over on a Hilchos Shabbos, what we know as Meister Shabbos. What's the din when a person, whether it's b'shoigeg, whether it's b'mezid, but he breaks Hilchos Shabbos. What's the status of the item that was created from a Chilul Shabbos? He cooks a chicken, he builds something on Shabbos. That's a whole sugya Meiser Shabbos. It's in common Gemaras. We spoke about it in the past. We're Zoich over here. The Kallus Agoda, it was a Gemara in Gittin, a Gemara Baba Kama, a Gemara in Chulin, a Gemara in Shabbos. And it's clear over there in Shin Yud Ches. Mishnah Berurah says that what would happen if somebody was Mechal Shabbos b'shoigeg on a Darabanan? So then it's mashma that we're makel. Person by accident, he accidentally salts a salad, which in halacha, it's all kulminei klalim of when you're allowed to salt and when you're not allowed to salt. He would be allowed to eat it. It's an issa d'rabbanan, b'shoigeg, we're makel. One that would learn over there in Siman Shin Yud Ches would assume that that's a klal in all of Hilchos Shabbos. Anytime that a person's over b'drabbanan on a shoigeg, so then the halacha would be is that the item is not Nasar. And all of a sudden, he comes to Siman Reish and Gimel. I suppose the Mishnah Berurah understood in the Shulchan Aruch that if you learned the Shin Yud Ches, you must have learned already Reish and Gimel. But then when he gets to Siman Reish and Gimel, he will see that over here, based on the Gemara in Shabbos, of course, in Daf Lamed Zayin, Lamed Ches. Based on the Gemara in Shabbos, that if a person is over on Chazara, he returns food to a fire, let's say, that doesn't have a blech, or perhaps we'll talk about maybe an oven, maybe a crock pot or whatnot. And he did it in Isser, and he didn't know the klalim of Hilchos Chazara, which Amit Hashem will try to talk about today, and he did it incorrectly. He returned food to an open flame. We'll see, maybe various cases. He didn't have Daita Lachs, or he didn't have Oida B'Yoda, all the various Tanaim of Chazara. So L'maisa, it sounds like the Kimat Bar in the Paiskim by us in Siman Reish and Gimel that the food would be aser, albeit that it's an Issa D'Rabbanan, albeit that he's b'shoigeg, but at Kama that there's some benefit that he took this cholent and you returned it to the fire, and now even if it was cooked already and it got mitztamik v'yavalai, it got more geschmack. So then, unbelievably, the halacha would be, that even though he's shoigig and it's only in a Sidra Banan, the food would be aser. So maybe you'll say, fine, but I'll serve the food to my family. So I won't eat it, but my family will eat it. Okay, Kedan, who's the family, doesn't mean the wife would be not allowed, but the husband, yeah, the husband not allowed, the wife, yeah. But Lamaisa, it's not true, because the Mishnah Berurah brings down that B'nai Beisai are included in this Isser. So it comes out, Mishnah Berurah in Simchat Lamed Hey, that he brings from the Magen Avraham that if a person returned a cholent be'isser, even b'shoigeg, and he wasn't following the klali chazara. Now we'll see today, tomorrow, next time. Not all, and the Olam will learn. Not all of the klali chazara are makib, but if he did one of the klali chazara, for example, group of a ketuma, he didn't return it to a fire that was gara for katim or something like that. So then the halacha is that the food is actually aser. This is ad kedei kach that it breaks the rules of regular Hilchos Shabbos, of regular Meiser Shabbos. So that severity has to give us a certain cheshek to understand the sugya. Obviously, there's something different about this sugya. The Chazal broke its common rules. So you can't do chazara on Shabbos. You can't return food to a fire on Shabbos without certain klalim. And there's two types, which we're going to see. There's one that the you can't take something which is not on the flame. We'll say loosely right now, when it's not on the flame, as of when Shabbos came in. I'm sorry, I hope you bear with me today, everybody. But it's not on the flame as of when Shabbos came in, and he takes it, and he, let's say, takes out a potato kugel, he takes out schnitzel, and he puts it even on a hot plate, even if it's garfikatim. That's what's called in halacha. That's not even chazara. That's known as nesina lechatchila. to go and do nesina lechatchila on Shabbos, that's an isser. We'll see in a minute what's the isser. Is it mechzikim mevashel? Is it a shamiyachate? Words that we're used to, but nonetheless, it's usser. And this is why I'll just give you an example that a person could be learning Hilchos Shabbos and he could be alive for many years and not realize he has a cholent on a Friday night, has a blech, everything is fine, gewaldig, except the cholent is burning out. So he knows that he can't take water from the sink, and he knows there's a blech, so the water that's going to go there is going to a covered fire and whatever. And he knows to take it out of the crack pot, he knows to pour it in slowly, he knows to mix it slowly, and then to put it back on the fire. Everything is great. But where did he take this water from? So he didn't want to set up an urn before Shabbos. So he took the urn, he poured water into a thermos, and that keeps the water hot. So the water is a klisheni. Klisheni you can put back into a klirishin. It's not bishul because the water is still hot. But wait, Rabbi say that water in the thermos, that's if you would take that water and put it into a pot, which you're putting onto a fire on Shabbos, that's an example of nesina lechatchila, which is also 100% according to all of the poskim. Why? This is not chazara. It's nesina lechatchila. It's water, which is not on the fire. The aleph base of Hilchos Chazara. People don't realize this. They know the tnayim of oidai beyadai and daitai lachzor, and it has to be fully cooked, and it has to be a covered flame, and they know all that. But they forget that the aleph most base of Hilchos Chazara is Dav Zayin Chazara. It's got to be being nechzar, going back to a flame. That means it has to be coming from a flame. Over here, if you start out on Shabbos, where's this water? It's inside a thermos. The thermos is not a flame. by a show of thumbs up, I think give me thumbs up. I think I'm right that people don't realize this one, and that a person would think, no, it's fine as long as I have a hot water. So then as long as I do all the other things that we spoke about, but you're missing the aleph base over here. You're taking something. What's the difference if I take something from the fridge? Or what's the difference if I take something from an urn, from a thermos, which is not on the fire? So that's one isser. That's the isser of nesina lechatchila. And then our sugya is the sugya of chazara, that even in a situation of where I'm coming from a fire, like I took off the cholent or the chicken soup, so we don't just let you go back to the fire. There's a whole list of halachas that you need to know, because what's the reason why? Says the Mishnah Berurah in Sivkotin Lamed Zayin. This is based on the Ran that hamachzir b'Shabbos, it looks like bishul. Machzikim mevashel. Okay, you can clear, and I saw in the Shus Yitzchak in the 18th parak, he has a whole arichas. Declare to them and to who does it look like bishul? Does it mean it looks to others like bishul? Does it mean that it looks okay? You're asking if water is baltil in the cholent, and that's in Hashem. We'll see if there are certain coolers and whatnot, etc. But I don't know why the water is baltil. The water is doing a tremendous pa'ula in the cholent. Shlomo Zalman happens to have a tshuva about that, but that's not our shaila. You're for sure not allowed to do it lechatchila. That's for sure us. There's no shaila. Now there'll be a shaila. Do we also be the Evan? But 100% it's also to go and do lechatchila, this is called nesina lechatchila by my case of the water. I was just answering a shaila. I'm not sure if the oilam saw the shaila, but I'll kapanim. But now there's a new isser, the isser of chazara. Chazara is even if you are on a flame, but there's kol minei halachas that we have in order to enable us to get this food back to the fire. Why? Because even if it was on the flame, but when I'm going to be putting it back on the fire, it looks like cooking. Everything we dealt with till now was shehiyah, and there the fear wasn't it looks like cooking, it's an Erev Shabbos. There the fear is that he's going to be nervous that his food is going to be, not getting cooked and whatnot. He's going to get hits, he's going to start stoking flames, etc. That's one sugya. Our sugya, the sugya, what says the Mishnah Berurah in Sivkotin Lamed Zayin, is known as mechzikim mevashel. Mechzikim mevashel means that if you don't do something to show I'm just returning, it's going to look like you're coming to cook for the first time. Now, the Shvutz Yitzchak, as a Claire, is it going to look to others, or is it to myself that I might feel like I'm cooking? It's interesting. I had a hergish of this on on Shabbos. My daughter, my 7-year-old, she says when she saw the boys went for Shabbos after Shavuos, they were taking the cholent off, and then they were putting it back into the crack pot. So she, with the tmimis, she said, aren't they doing bishul on Shabbos? No. There's a siman gadol to, you get siyata d'shmaya in the learning, like the Chassam Sefer says. You see that this is what the Koil HaGud is supposed to be learning now. She's asking the kasha, doesn't this look like cooking? Now I explained to her. I said, what do you mean? If it would look like cooking, would the boys be holding on to the pot the whole time? If it would look like cooking, would it be already hot? If it would look like cooking, would the food be fully cooked? If it would look like cooking, I told her when mommy puts the cholent in the crack pot, does it have silver foil lid on Erev Shabbos? No. So this is obviously doesn't look like cooking. I explained it to her. I'm not sure if she understood, but the Olam understands. So the concept, you see, we got to do all types of zachin to make sure it doesn't look like cooking. Maybe for others, maybe for ourselves, you can clear. But like upon him, excuse me, like upon him, that's the halacha. And what the maisa are those klalim? What are those klalim? So the first and basic klal is the klal, which already we see in the Shulchan Aruch and Sif Aleph. Over here, we're already up to Sif Beis. The klal in Sif Aleph is that it has to be number one and first and foremost. We'll see this might be the one klal which is really going to be ma'akif, but it has to be garfikatim. It has to be what we explained, a covered fire, a fire that you can't stoke. The idea being that you don't look like you're cooking at kama, that you're returning it to a covered flame, or you're returning it to a flame which is unstokable, because people, when they come to cook, they cook in a very efficient fire, not a fire that's covered, not a fire that you can't stoke. That, Rabbi Yisai, is one ma'alech in the Isser of why you need a goof of a ketuma, why you need to have this covered flame. Now, I must tell you, the Sharatzin and Sivkot and Lamed Zayin, he brings down this famous Rabbeinu Tam in the Sefer Yasher that says, no, this is the same old problem that we don't allow you to return to an uncovered flame because it's going to shama yechata. You're going to come to stoke. Now, wait, what do you mean I'm going to come to stoke? The Isser of Chazara is even on things that we were never concerned with stoking. For example, it's on things that are cooked in Michael Ben Drisai. For example, it's on things which are mitztamik viraloi. I'm taking a potato coke, I'm putting it back on the fire. It's mitztamik viraloi. It's getting dried out. Afa pikein, there's an Isser, you can't put it onto an open flame. So how could the Rabbeinu Tam say that the reason why we're not allowed to return things to an open flame is because Shema Yechate. If it was Shema Yechate, you see, we weren't nervous about Shema Yechate before Shabbos on these items. So the answer, the Olam understands themselves, is a big chilik. On Shabbos itself, where you see he's doing something on Shabbos and he's worried that the food won't be hot and it's for now. So then he might stoke. There's more of a fear on Shabbos. On Erev Shabbos, we say that obviously set it up with enough time that it's going to cook and he won't have to stoke, etc. It's close man that it's at least a third cook, or if it's mitzvah for rabbi. So this Rabbi Yisai is the Shita of Rabbeinu Tam. The reason I need garfikotim is because Shema Yechate. Now you'll see in a minute, a very interesting thing, perhaps enough Gemina. Then starts Sif Beis. So Sif Aleph told us about making sure that when you return it, Aleph, first and foremost, you're taking the cholent and you're holding it in your hand and you're making sure when you put the water in that you don't stir it very quickly. And then you put it back to the crack pot. The Aleph Beis, you must make sure you have a blech. We spoke about making a blech in a crack pot. It's not such a pashut matziv. You have to make, maybe we said baking paper. We said maybe put the silver balls and put the silver foil around. Okay, but that's the Aleph Beis. Now, see Beis, that's Aleph. Now the Beis, see Beis, it seems to be a whole new list of rules that, hey, nachanami, I'm putting it back to a covered fire, but it still looks like you're in the cooking process. When does it not look like in the cooking process? When I have a whole list of rules that show me that I'm just returning the food to the original matziv. For example, it's oida biyodo, which we'll have to translate. Mashenkin, if I put it down on the karka, so then already, in those days, they didn't nishkaven fridge. They put it on the karka. It means they're finished cooking. It's cooling down. The karka was the coldest place in the house. Le'aleinu rachman al-tzlan, that's what it says in Shin Yud Aleph. When there's a mace rachman al-tzlan in Shabbos, Kufn and Aleph, you put him on the floor. So he's not masriach rachman al-tzlan. So Mamela, I can't put it on the floor because then it doesn't look like I'm going back. It looks like I finished the cooking process and I'm starting from new. So that's where we get the klal of oida biyada, and there's a lot in between. Do I have to be mamash holding it? Is it on the counter is enough if I'm holding one part? Or what's the ikar, the oida biyada, or not putting it on the karka? Okay, we'll have to see. Then it's not enough. You have to have daitei lachzor. You're holding it, but it can't be you're holding it and you're taking it off and you come to the table and you want to serve it for Friday night and you're not interested in putting it back on the fire. And pitom, while it's in your hand, you say, you know what, I'm going to put it back. I see that the oilam's not hungry. I'm going to put it back. So then it wasn't daita lachzor. You need to have a daita lachzor. You need to show that I'm just returning. So now those two tanoim of daita lachzor, oidabi yadai, and we'll see the Ramah talks about maybe something about a chair, an intermediary step. You put something not on the floor, but not in your hand. And what's about a chair? What's the din of that, etc. So now, very interesting thing here, the Mishnah Berurah, when it comes to Sif Aleph, and he explains why it has to be a covered fire, says the Mishnah Berurah, because of Shem Yechate, or because of Mechzik and Mavashal. In the Sefer Mishnah Berurah, he brings Mechzik and Mavashal. In the Sefer Sharatzin, he brings the other reason, Al Shem Yechate. Here, says the Mishnah Berurah, emphatically, without any other tzad. He says, here the reason why I can't return it unless it was in your hand, unless you had the das, is because Mechzik and Mavashal. What happened to Shem Yechate? Why doesn't he bring the other tzad? And it's more explicit in the Balatanya. The Balatanya doesn't bring two shitas. In Sif Aleph by the Balatanya, when he explains when you're returning something, he says you have to return it to a covered flame. He says, because if not, Shem Yechate, you'll come to stoke it. But when it comes to these tanoim, the new Chazara, we'll call it the new problems in Chazara, the problem of Oidabi Yadai, the problem of Daita Lachzor. There, it says the grass, it's out to Mechzik and Mavashal. So here, it seems to be, it's Pashit. When it came to the point of putting it back to an open fire, there could be a chash of Shem Yechate. Here, there's no Shem Yechate. When these new tnoyim that I have to be holding it, the new tnai that I have to be not putting it on the karka, my das to return it, there, nothing to do with Shem Yechate. We're not afraid you're going to be mechate. But we're afraid is that it looks like cooking. It looks like he's coming to cook for the first time. So therefore, you have to show us that you're not coming to cook for the first time. Yeah, derech agav, it sounds like from the whole tnai of Daita Lachzor, a pshitis to the shaila of the Shvutz Yitzchak. Because if the whole purpose of these tnayim is a Mechzik and Mavashal, a marasayin of other people, how could they know what I'm thinking? It would sound like Daita Lachzor means I have the das to return it. I'm the only one that knows. Me and the Heilig of Hashem are the only one that knows if I have the das to return it. So you see, the Mechzik and Mavashal means I myself look like I'm cooking and I might come to cook. So this is a Baisai Zakdama. This is Akdama. So therefore, for example, just to make it a little bit practical before we get more into the sugya. So therefore, Friday night, especially these nights, they're the early Shabbos and they're long Fridays and whatnot. So sometimes you don't make an early Shabbos or whatnot. Or even if you do make an early Shabbos, but the kids have to eat. So Friday night, you take the chicken. Let's say you didn't make an early Shabbos, make it easy case. You go to the oven. Your husband, the husband's in shul, you take out the chicken from the oven, and now you want to give to the kids the chicken, some potato kugel, whatnot. And then when the tata comes time from the shul, so he'll eat his chicken. So what are you going to do? You're going to take out the chicken, take out the potato kugel, give it to the kid, and then push it back inside the oven. Now let's analyze this. In an oven, you can't make a blech. We spoke about this many times. There's no blech in an oven. So now let's analyze this. I have a tray. If I take the chicken from there and I take the potato kugel from there when it's inside, gewaldig, wunderbar. But if I take the tray, and I think people do this without that, I'm trying to give you examples today, like my example of the thermos. I'm trying to give you examples today that people that might even know Hilchos Chazara, but they just don't think, they don't realize it. I have a chicken, now if the fire's off, and it's just hot inside the oven, okay, so that's gorif. But let's say I open up the oven, I take out the tray all the way, I take out chicken, I take out potato kugel, and I push back in the tray. What did you just do, Rabbi Isai? What did you just do? You might have had Daita Lachzor. I'm not sure if that's Oida B'Yada. We'll see if you're holding the tray, you're not holding the tray, whatever. But Rabbi Isai, the Aleph, the Sif Aleph, you don't have Grufa Vekatuma. You're putting it back into an oven, which is a fire, which is not covered. So you're over on Chazara. Rabbi Isai, it's very serious. If it's Mistamik V'Yafa Loi, the food would actually even be usser. It would actually even be usser. That's a good example. So too, it seems to be a crack pot. If you take food out of a crack pot, you put it back without a blech, it seems to be that the food would be usser taka. Okay, maybe there's an eitzah when it comes to the food in the oven. My wife was asking me an eitzah. She said this is taka very prevalent there. I said, maybe if you pull it out a little bit, the tray, Sometimes you just got to get it out a little bit. So if you pull out the tray a little bit and really most of the tray is still there by the fire inside the oven, so maybe you could say that's still called it's in the oven, it's still on the fire, and you're not doing chazara because you didn't take it off. But you have to be aware of these things. Now, let's try and get some of the kolalim. First of Oida B'Yada, and then we'll see if we have time. We'll try to go into Garif Katim. The Mishabura in Siv Katim Lamed Beis is Meko B'di Eved with either or. Daiter Lachzor or Oida B'Yada Kloimar. Garif Katim, we're going to see is a T'nai that's going to be Ma'akiv. If you don't have Garif Katim, that's so gefährlich, it's Mechzik Mevachel, Shamichata, that it could even ask the food. But the Mishabura says that, let's say I have one. My das is to return it. Or it's a bederka, you need two. Look at you need both. But let's say my das is to return it, or it was in my hands. So then, with the Eved, the Mishabura brings down that you could be meko. Okay, so let's go slowly. What's called oida biyada? In the olden days, right? Who remembers the Hain? In the olden days, you took a cholent out, the other person scooped it out, you took that cholent, you put it back on the blech, and you had cholent, and you had cholent later on. Okay, but today, sometimes the fellow needs cholent, he's by himself, or let's say his wife's a nida. That could be a whole gan to Shaila scooping out cholent. She's a nida, you're nida, you're all nida, and she's scooping out the cholent. So maybe that's a problem because you're holding the cholent and she's scooping. So how do I do this by myself when I don't have two people? So the shaila is, can I just take it and put it on the counter? I want to know, can I just take the cholent and put it on the counter? And I'll put my hand on the side like this, I'll hold on the, the little hand on the side, you'll hold it as you scoop it out. Okay, I guess you all realize that if I would take it and put it on the counter in a way where if I wasn't holding it, it would fall. Okay, so that's called oida b'yada, that's called holding it. But is this enough to take it, put it on the counter, and just put my hand on it to hold it? Let's done this shaila. This shaila, all the Balchim have this shaila both sides. He comes, one Balchim comes at 1 in the morning, one comes at 2 in the morning at my house. And they came over last Shabbos, somehow by lunchtime, there wasn't that much cholent left. One Balchim comes at 1, one Balchim comes at 2, one Balchim comes at 3. Me, I came at 4, came out nothing left. So what do you do? How did they get the cholent out? So let's done. There's a tshuva from the Igros Moshe. It's not murder Gemaisi. You see the koyach hadiyik of the Goyna Gadol Rabbeinu Atzadik Goyna Gadol Ramoshe Feinchi Teich Atzadik Levracha. Ramoshe in Ein Dal Lamed Gimel. I didn't give the marmakim to the Olam, but it's a very, very short tshuva. So I'll just tell you about Peh what he says. It's one of those handwritten tshuvas to, those Baal Peh tshuvas to Rav Shimon Eider. Over there, Ramoshe says an interesting thing. He says, what happens if I take a cholent and I put it on the floor? Now we know floor is very bad in halacha. Floor in halacha is hiniach agabe karka, and that certainly takes away the tsura that I'm just returning, and that's certainly as a tsura of a mechzik mevashel. So what happens if I take the cholent, I put it on the floor, but my hand is still on the cholent? We'll get to obviously a more normal example in a moment, but that's the shaila Moshe's done it. The Moshe has a Maridik Gazach, the Shoyal, I guess, for Shimon Eider. He asked him that the Rambam in Paris Mishnayos says that you need that the cholent should be in the avir. The Lashon of the Rambam is in the avir. So he says it should sound like from the Paris Mishnayos, it should be in the avir. So therefore, if it's on the floor, even if you're holding it, it's not enough. Ramoshe says, nah, that's not a taina because the Paris Mishnayos is not the Yad Chazaka. Oh, very good. He says the Paris Mishnayos is not the Yad Chazaka. And the Pirush Mishnah is because the Rambam Hazeh, so the Chayr has to be in the air. So Ramoshe says, no, yesh lahakol. Why? Now, before the diak, it's mamish. I turned the page a minute. It's priceless. Ramoshe says, he says, beside what you're telling me with the Pirush Mishnah and the Rambam, he says the Rambam has a sefer Yad Chazak. Over there, he doesn't. He says, and more so, what was the lashon that the Gemara uses? The lashon the Gemara uses, right? Is hinicha gabe karka, not himida gabe karka. He says Voltegevein that the lashon would have been hemida karka. So then it sounds like that it's hiniach sounds like it's left by itself. The word hiniach hanacha sounds like it's left by itself. Hemida sounds like maybe you're still there. So he says that's what the Gemara is trying to say. Since the Gemara says it means that you did such a mice, you just left it alone. But if you would still be holding it, then it would still be mutter. If it would have said mida ala karka, then even if you're holding it, it's about. And I must tell you, in modern Hebrew, I can't say this shir by side. And a lot of times in the shul on Friday night, some of the topics that we talk about here, I'll say in the shul on Friday night. That way I don't have to prepare. Okay, I do. But Lamaisa, this one I can't say because in modern Hebrew, this doesn't go. Ramosha, obviously, he knew Lashon HaKodesh Kipshutai. But in modern Hebrew, the Lashon Hemida, it's the opposite. If it would have said Hemida, so then Hemida has much more of a toikif of where he left it alone. But Ramosha is saying the opposite. When it says the word Henicha, that's called you left it alone. So therefore, if you didn't leave it alone and you're still holding on with your hand, so that's going to be already considered allowed to return it. You're still going to be allowed to return it. That's considered an oidoi biyadoi. The mere fact that my hand is touching it. Now, this Ramosha is a chiddush. First of all, the Pirush Mishnayos, it's true. It's not the Rambam in the Yad is just quoting the Lashon Gemara. The Pirush Mishnayos is explaining it. We would have thought that perhaps it's Taga Gevaldik a diak. And also, like I said, it's a diak, it's a geises here. The Shmir Shabbos in Aleph Yud Ches, he brings the Maim Shik and the domestic Eliezer, that they seem to say that karka does not work even when you're holding on the Loiker Moshe. They go on, but they say that, yeah, karka doesn't work if you're holding it. Everyone has a case, the challenge on the floor, my hand is on it. Is that still called Oida Biyadai? So Moshe says, yes. Lalacha. The Shabbos brings the Maim Shik and the domestic Eliezer, no. Lalacha. However, they bring, but a meat of a safsel, which we know is like an intermediary stage, even though that's like a little bit of a suffix, but that far it's mutter. Akama, your hand is on the intermediary stage. You know, in those days, the mita, the safsel was like that little holding section. So if your hand was on it when you scooped out the cholent, then they say that's allowed. So obviously, what's the shaila? Now it's by a karka, that's considered a total silik. When I put something on the karka, that's considered their fridge. It's totally done. So therefore, putting your hand on it is no good. But mashenke meet the safsel, which is in the middle, putting your hand on it is enough. Okay. So where's this negay us? What's a countertop? What's a countertop in halacha? Is a countertop the floor? Is a countertop a meat of a safsel? What exactly is a countertop? Now you can stay yourself. You can hear both ways. The Shtitzlik, for example, he brings Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rav Yashiv that a karka shows a total silo because that's where they cool things down because it's cold on the ground, like I mentioned before. But the counter is a place where people put things back. So therefore, that can be considered, it's putting things right back onto the fire, especially I would add, Rabbi Isai, if it's right nearby on the fire. That shows maybe it's going back. And therefore, there are a lot that say that a countertop, Rav Shlomo Zalman, Rav Yashiv, a countertop is not karka. A countertop would be more like meat of a safsel, lefi this. All I'd have to do is put my hand on the cholent when I put it on the countertop. He brings the Sefer Orach Shabbos. He brings in Perek Beis and Noisayin Vav. He brings from Rav Vosner. He has a tshuva from Rav Vosner. He brings from others. They want to say no. Even at times of Chazal, he says in the time of Chazal, they did both. Also on the karka. Sometimes they, they wouldn't have room, so they would put things on the karka, and they also might return it. He says, but the vort of a meat of a safsel was something more miyuchad. The vort of a meat of a safsel was like it's an intermediary thing. You can never leave it there. It's a rai. You can't leave it there. So this is a world war. There's a world war. Listen, I would just say like this, and this is one of the most important things you're going to hear in the start of Chazara. There is a shita of the Ran, and this Ran is brought in the Ramah in the beginning of our Sif, and the Ran is brought again at the end of the Siman, and this Ran throws a monkey wrench into the whole entire Chazara. He says the whole din of Chazara that we require, and listen closely, that we require these tnayim of I'm going back to the fire, and that it's Mexican mevachel, and putting it on the karka shows I'm done. All those tnayim are only for situations of where the food was, let's say, in my hand before Shabbos started. But if at any point the food was on the fire when Shabbos came in, let's say when Ben Ishmashes came in, the food was on a fire. So then even if you put it on the karka later on Shabbos, we look at the beginning of Shabbos to establish, is it always considered going back to the fire? This works only for the Tnaim that we're talking about now, not for Grufa Ketuma. You always have to go back to a covered flame. That's Mefurish in the Beis Yosef. But Rabbi Isai, this is the world savior. The Ran just said that any time I take food off of the fire that was on the fire as when Shabbos came in. So it's true you need lichatchila, oida b'yada, and daital achser, and all these things. That's lichatchila. But the Ran says that there's no shaila, that since it was on the fire as of when Shabbos came in, so we always consider you as to be returning it to the fire. When is it that we don't consider you unless you do something like putting it in your hands or daital achser to be going back to the fire? That's only when it wasn't on the fire as of when Shabbos came in. For example, Shabbos didn't come in, you're holding the item, then, we could talk. But Mashenkein, in Kimat, a lot of our cases, if not most of our cases, we're going to see, by us, it was always on the fire. So I decided, let's go back to the cholent. The cholent was in the crack pot as Erev Shabbos came in. Now I take it off. According to the Ran, I don't need daital achser. I don't need oida b'yadai. I can even put it on the karka, and then I can return it to the fire, because we always look that everything you're doing is just going back to the fire. Since when Shabbos came in, it was on the fire. So we look at it always as if you're going back to the fire. How do we paskin? The other Rishonim argue on the Ran. The way we paskin says the Bir Allah, says the Mishabura, the Ramah. He says the Kain Nehagin, all the Tnai Chazara except for Grufa Ketuma, that you need always, even if it was on the fire before Shabbos, you still need Grufa Ketuma. But in our case, you have Grufa Ketuma, it's a covered crack pot, let's say, and you take it off. So now let's add up everything we have here. Because the Ramah says at the end, the minig is to be makel, even if the food went on the karka, so long as it was on the fire as when Shabbos came in. So now the Ramah ends, toiv lachmir. It's good to be machmir on this shaila. Okay, so the Gans Klai is machmir on this shaila. But there was a minig, like the Ramah says, that they actually did this Ramah, this Ran lichatchila. So now let's add up the shaila. Let's add up the Gans shaila. I have a cholent. I take the cholent and I put it on the countertop, and I put my hand on it. Is that enough to return it to a covered fire? Lefir of Moshe, it's for sure enough. Even if I put it on the floor mamish and put my hand on it, it's enough. And am I worried about the mamshik, that when your hand is on the floor, it's not enough? But maybe a countertop is not called floor. It's called the mita v'zavta, like Rosh Hashanah. So then we're right there, okay, with a hand on it. And you're worried that what? That number one, a hand on the karka is no good. And you're worried that a countertop is called karka. So even with all that, but since it was on the fire as when Shabbos came in, the Ran is makel. And even though we're not saimach on the Ran lechatchila, but certainly with the Evid we're makel. So when you add it all up, if somebody asks me, am I allowed lechatchila to take a chal and put it on the countertop and put my hand on the handle and then return it? Is that called oida b'yada when I have the daital achser? Can I be saying on the Ran, Rav Moshe, and the Mamshik, and all these cheshbonis, and to consider it at least at a mita v'safsel, to consider at least the countertop to be a mita v'safsel, or at least to be maker like Rav Moshe, that a countertop, even if it's called karka, I'm allowed to put my hand in it, or at least even if you want to be machmar and all of this, but the Ran is makel anyways, even if it was on the floor, so long as it was on the fire when Shabbos came in. So I think it's a sveika, and you can be makel, and that's what I tell my boys. I tell them that they're allowed to do that, because it is a little bit of a shasatzchak to tell a bacha to take it and put it at the edge of the counter in a way of where it might fall over a bite side. Then you know what? You might wake up in the morning without a cholent, and you might wake up with a broken crock pot. Okay, is there an Indian to lift it while it's on the counter in a way where theoretically, if it would have been off the counter, then it would fall? Okay, so these are all chumras. It's borrowed to me la halacha that if you have daital achser, and don't forget, it is all in addition to the fact that we said that daital achser without oida b'yadai, but the Evid anyways works. So this is borer that I think a person can be makel on this as even a lechatchila. That's Rabbi Yisai, number one. Is that crystal clear? Before I go weiter, Rabbi Yisai, I'll take questions for a moment if there are them ones, because it's somewhat of a new topic. We're good to go. Okay.
Can you explain why there's an Isser of Shem Yechata if it's Garif Katum?
If it's Garif Katim, No, there's no Shemichata.
No, according to Rebbeinu Tam.
No, the Rebbeinu Tam was only going that you require Garifikotim, otherwise there'll be a Shemichata. Rebbeinu Tam was not going on the new Tnoim. So on the old, you're right. In the old Tnai, where the requirement is to make it Garifikotim, that's Hagufa, because the Rebbeinu Tam holds this Shemichata. If that's not clear, I could explain it again.
Let's try explaining it again, because I had trouble with this morning.
That's very important. There are two totally different types of T'nai Chazara. There's one type of T'nai Chazara, which is the first type. That's Sif Aleph. That we have a machlokes. What's the reason why I need to have a covered flame? And if not, it's called the problem of Chazara. The simple way to learn the Mishnah Berurah says Mexican Mavash. Okay, it looks like cooking. It's an open flame. It looks like cooking. Rebbeinu Tam says if you have an open flame, you can't put things back, even if you held it the whole time and everything. Why? Because you'll be mechate. Because it's an open flame. This open flame didn't bother us in Shehiyah when it was fully cooked. Okay, but by Shabbos it bothers us more because he's more nervous on Shabbos because now it's mamish shas ma'isa or whatever. So therefore we're machmir on an open flame on Shabbos, and therefore Rebbeinu Tam says that the problem of having an open flame on Shabbos is taka shemichata. And therefore, you can never return anything to an open flame on Shabbos, ever. And it has to be garfikata. That problem, says the Graz, and the Rebbeinu Tam it brought in the Graz, the only problem they learn of this T'nai Chazara is shemichata. I told you, Mishnah Berurah has a different side, but the Graz says that's the only side. Now, there are three new T'nai Chazara, Taital Achzir, and Oida and all that business. Those T'noim, the Graz brings down are al Tzmechsi. Kloimar, me that I hold that the first T'nai is Rebbeinu Tam, but even Rebbeinu Tam is going to agree that these T'noim have nothing to do with Shemichata. They're not Shemichata. The fire is covered, like Rabbi Gadisman is saying. Now the fire is covered. When the fire is covered, so then the only problem that could be now is, yeah, but this looks like you're cooking, so it's covered. I don't know, but it looks no good. It doesn't look good over here. You can't take a schnitzel out of the fridge. It looks like, so if we do all these things to show that I'm just returning. So no one sees it as a starting of a cooking process. You yourself don't see it. So
it's possible that Rashi and Rebbeinu Tam Chelik and Rashi Mechzer B'Vashel is referring to the T'nai Chazara, and Rebbeinu Tam is talking about why you need Garif Akatim. Is that possible? But
it's not. It doesn't. The problem is like this. The problem is it doesn't work out. Let's say in the Ran, for example, the Ran in Tezayim Abayz in Dibra Maskal Gemara, he's going on the Mefurish. I'll read you his lashon. Machzir b'Shabbos nir k'mevashel im eina ketuma. He's going on the problem of ketuma, and he's saying it's machzir k'mevashel. So he's head on against the Rebbeinu Tam. You could do that in a few Rishonim. I could do that in the Ritva. I admit, though, it's not muchach. I saw one sefer, he brings down a list of mamish, 20 Rishonim that are arguing on Rebbeinu Tam. And, I think today they call it news fake. It's news fake, Rabbi say, because you have mamish 20 Rishonim, only 2 or 3 of these Rishonim are discussing exactly the T'nai that Rebbeinu Tam was discussing. So it's true, the Ran is head on against the Rebbeinu Tam. Because the Ran is saying that the T'nai of Gufa Ketuma is a Gufa because of Mechzik Mevashim. And the answer is, it's also understandable. He held that once you're on Shabbos, once you're dealing with a fully cooked food and mitztamik the ra'aloy or whatever, why in the world should there be a Shemichata? So therefore the Ran had to come up with a whole new problem, the Mechzik Mevashim.
Maybe the Shem Yechata, because you broke the chain of Hesach Hadas by picking it up again. Isn't that a?
Yeah, but I have a covered fire. We never ever found that we're going to be worried that he's going to go and change a matziv of where he was Mesiach Das. However, if he has a covered fire, he's shown us that I'm not in the cooking process, and I'm not going to machata. So what? I'm worried that he's going to, if you got to worry about that, you got to worry about somebody turning lights on Shabbos. We're never worried about a person changing a matziv. That's a big yesod in Hilchos Yichud. A lot of times a person has he's driving on a highway, and on the highway, there's no problem of yichud because people could see in and whatever. No, so why aren't we worried that, I'll give you even a better one. He's in a house and the door is open and it's him and a girl, it's him and his kala and the door is open and people could theoretically see in. What do you mean? He could just close the door. But that's called, he's going to do an Aveira. He's going to change the matzah from not yichud to yichud. That we're never afraid he's going to change the, pardon my mashal. But it's the same idea. Once he went and was, Masir Das, I have a covered flame, I'm not cooking, so now what? Now he's going to go and start wiping off all the dust and flaring up that we're never worried about.
The Shemichata goes away according to the time once you go for Katamit and then it can't come back again. So why does it need Sainenes?
Oh, so that is a world war. Some say very simply Tzanenet is al bishul, okay, but that doesn't stem in the Magen Avraham and the going. The pashtus of Tzanenet is that also might be a surah of it looks like it's cooking. I mean, this thing is cold. Imagine a 6-year-old's mind when she would see a chalent that was cold. I was holding it the whole time and I planned on going back and I was sitting and schmoozing with my brothers the whole entire time. I have this cold thing, but I'm holding it and my das needs to go back. Yeah, here you das, and it's a covered flame. Here. But up here, it certainly doesn't look like this is returning. It certainly looks like you're coming to cook. You're taking something cold and you're coming to cook. Now, I could have heard over here, theoretically, that there would be a Shemi Yachate because now it's taka cold and whatnot. I could have heard that. I didn't find anyone that explicitly says that. It sounds like from those that I'll read you the Lashinus. Just one moment. Rosachas, when you look in the Ritva, for example, he says, if it's Nistana Legamre, you can't have the loy here. Muchach in the sugya the beinin sheyachzer nekoidim shitstana Legamre the loy lechsi kemevashel. The Ritva says mefurish that when it's cold, what does it look like? It looks like mevashel. And if you look in the Beis Yosef, he says a different lashon. He says dahavle kemevashel. But it sounds like the same idea. The verse says the kemevashel. The Minchas Koyin is a very famous sefer. He has on 2 big topics. One is on Ben Hashmashis, and one is taka on the inyanim of these inyanim, Chazara, Bishul, and everything. He says nearly like the time of the torch, there was Sachas, Mishum Isser Bishul. He sounds like something else. He sounds like there's actual Bishul we're worried about. We're actually worried about Bishul. But Dakopanim, this is one big topic over here. Now, the Maisa. Let me give you something to hop on to. Obviously, we're going to have to build more and more. I'm going to just, be matzia today. I suppose what I'm going to say now is a very big chiddush, but, I want you to at least think about it. So the shaila is like this. The shaila is, I heard a maisa. The maisa is that somebody took a cholent off of the crock pot and, somebody said to him, what do you mean? How are you going to put the cholent back? What are you doing? There's nothing inside the cholent. Like there's no black, there's no anything. So he said like this. He said, no, I'm not machmir on the crock pot shaila. What does he mean? I'll explain to you what he means. He means there's a totally separate crackpot shaila, which people mistakenly, this is one of the most common mistakes. This is the most common mistake in general. Everyone knows there's some shaila out there with a crackpot, and it makes a gzera shava, crackpot. There's a crackpot, verstehst? So he knows there's a shaila. What's the shaila? There is a famous shaila, Rosh Shlomo Zalman, the Gabi Atmana, obviously, Beline, the Mitzvah Shem, we're going to learn it one day, probably in the near future. There's a shaila that Shlomo Zalman held that a crackpot is a hatmana monster. Since it's fire on all sides, then Mitzvah Shem, when it comes time for hatmana, don't worry. I'll show you in my video over here. I have up there, if you see, all the way upstairs, I have a crackpot, which when the crackpot broke, or perhaps I broke it for this purpose, when it broke, so I took it apart, and I'll be able to show everybody in the Olam, Bez Hashem, exactly what is going on in our crackpots, and we'll see exactly, what's the shaila. But there's a big shaila in crackpots that perhaps it's called atmana with fire on all sides, and there's a sugya that you're not allowed to have fire on all sides when it comes to food on Shabbos. That's Rosh Shlomo Zalman's chiddush. Others say it doesn't have fire on all sides because on the top it doesn't have fire. Shlomo Zalman says, what do you mean? It'll explode if it has fire on all sides. That's enough. This is a world war. and a mitzvah Hashem will come back. But it's called a chumrah of Shlomo Zalman. Not everybody held of this. Shlomo Zalman was machmer, not everybody held of this. In order to get out of Shlomo Zalman's problem, what the Welt does is, like I mentioned in the past, you take like a tuna can, make sure there's no tuna in there. You take a tuna can, you take a couple of silver foil bowls if you want, and you raise it up. Once you raise it up a little bit and you could see a part of the pot, so then even Shlomo Zalman will be happy that it's not fire on all sides. That has nothing to do with anything that we're talking about or have talked about in the past. And not everyone's machmer that shadow. But that Rabbi side has nothing to do with the blech. If you do that, you still got to put a silver foil around or the baking paper around or whatever we spoke about. And if you take the cholent and return it to the crock pot, a crock pot is called an open flame. Kloimar, it's a regular, normal way of cooking, and you didn't do something to show me you're not in the cooking process. You didn't cover your fire. You didn't show me that you're not in the cooking process. That is not a garfikatim. And when we spoke last time in Shehiyah, so therefore a crock pot was a problem of being uncooked food or not fully cooked food or third cooked food on an open flame. And now when we're in the world of Chazara, even if it would be fully cooked, it is Isser Gomer 100% to take food and return it to a crock pot. He says, I'm not machmer Shlomo Zalman like that. It's nothing to do with that Shaila. No one in the world can say I'm not machmer on a crock pot. A crock pot is a regular cooking. It's like saying I'm not machmer on an oven. The oven was also that case. What's an oven? An oven is a crock pot. We said you take out the tray with the chicken and the potato kugel, and you can't now push it back in because there's no blech. But I'm not machmer on a crock pot. So that's not going to help. So now they came with the Shaila. They came to the Rav and they asked the Shaila. The other person said, what are you talking about? Not machmer. There's no blech. You can't put the food back now. He says, well, I have it in my hand and my das was to return it. And there's no blech. It's not roof of a ketuma. So of course it's asa. And this Rabbi Isai is now a big problem. I can't, if I put the cholent back, first of all, I can't put the cholent back. There's no garfikatim. And that's the first t'nai of Chazara. And second of all, I put it back, I won't even be able to eat it because it'll become in stomach v'yafalai. We're talking where the food is fully cooked. If it's not fully cooked, then you're over on bishul. So this Rav answered, there's a Rav in my neighbor in Ramat Shlomo, and he answered the cholent on Shabbos. He answered the cholent on Shabbos. L'maisa, this will be Nageya all the time. The cholent is burning out. You didn't put it in a blech, in the crock pot. You want to take out the cholent, put hot water in it. You know, and this is not water from a thermos. This is water from an urn and whatever. You want to get out of the shiloh of the kashrus shiloh, so you take it in a cup and you pour it into the cholent and you mix it. Now you want to put it back. How could you put it back? How are you putting the cholent back? You're putting it back without a blech. So this Rav answered, and that lemaisa is what it seems to say in the Mishabur and Sivkot and Samach Gimel. Mishabur and Sivkot and Samach Gimel. It seems the Rav paskins correctly. He says, Pirish, right? Remember, I told you that there's a sheet of the Ran, that the Ran is makel so long as the food was on the fire, as when Shabbos came in.
77. If the Rav gives a second to put it on the screen, don't could read it.
My pleasure.
It's coming on. So the Rav can continue. Here we go.
The Ran was makel if the food was on the fire as when Shabbos came in, and the Ramah said that the minig is to be makel like this Ran, and to falazach on the Ran, even though he says toiv lachman, it's not kedaitu, and that's why we always do daita lachzer and oida biyado and all the tznoyim and everything. Okay, but the Maisa, the Ran, we are makel like the Ran b'diavad. We're makel like the Ran if you put it on the karka or whatever. We're makel like the Ran b'diavad. Okay, of them zok the mishabura. Don't get confused. When the Ran was makel that on Erev Shabbos, it was on the fire and that's enough. He just means the t'nayim of oida b'yado and daita lachzer. Aval gar, if it caught him, even if it was on the fire as when Shabbos came in, here even the Ran agrees. Zok the mishabura the kulei alma bin, and here there's nothing to discuss.
Samach Gimel.
Samach Gimel, right? Here brings the mishabura that the Taz says that there's nothing to discuss. Avada garifikotim, you must make sure that it's garifikotim, and there's no Ran. The Ran was never makel in a situation of where it was on the fire as when Shabbos came in to return to an open flame. There's no Ran. The Ran was on, and the way we explained it, it's Gevaldik. The whole lumdus of the Ran is what? Is that there's this high level Mexican Mevashal by Garvikatim, which doesn't, it's not as high level by the other Tanaim of Daitel Achzor. So if it was on the fire as when Shabbos came in, so now everything looks like it's always going back to the fire. But Lamaisa, to go and return something to a fire that's stokeable, that's Mexican Mevashal. So what does it help me that it was on the fire as when Shabbos came in? Bishlama, the other Tanaim, because now it doesn't look like you're starting up the process again. Okay, it's Oida B'Yadai, it's not cooking. When is that? Even if it's not Oida B'Yadai, no, but if it was on the fire, so we assume things that were on the fire, they're going back to the fire, good. But if it's an open fire, so then that's Mamish Mexican Mevashal, because he's putting it onto a fire and it looks like he's going to stoke. That's the Mishnah Berurah, that's the Taz, that's the Prima Gadim, and that seems to be the Pashup Pshat, and therefore, even though he had Oida B'Yadai and Daitel Achzor and he wants to put this crack back on Shabbos, this Rav said it's Aser. Now, the Rav is right, and he doesn't need my askama. He's obviously more chashuv than me because everybody is. The only thing is that let's dine a different shayla. This Rav, they came to the Rav after they had already put back on the challah, and the Rav asked the challah. And one that reads Mishnah Berurah will say the same thing. And this Rav is right. They put it back on, they did an Isser, and we said in the beginning of the Shir, Chazara, B'Shoigeg is Aser, once in the stomach, V'Yavalai, game over. This challenge is Aser. The Shaila is if there's a Limitz. So I'm going to tell you, there's an unbelievable, there's a Chidah, the Birkei Yosef, in Tzib Beis. He brings down a Rash Bates, which is a Tash Bates. The Tash Bates says something unbelievable. He says, the Yesh Mekilim Al Pi Yerushalmi, this Ran is a Yerushalmi really. That the Yerushalmi seems to say that when the food was on the fire, as when Shabbos came in, there are no necessary tnoyim of Oida B'Yadai and Daitel Achzor. That is the Ran we keep quoting. That the minig is like the Ran, but the Mishnah Berurah, the Ramah say, did not be Mako like the Ran. That's the Ran. On that Yerushalmi that the Ran is quoting, the Tashbeit says, Yesh Mekilim Afilu Al Yerushalmi, Afilu when it's Eina Grufa V'Ketuma. He says, not like you just heard from me, not like the Mishnah Berurah, not like the Taz, not like the Prima God. The Chidah brings down that he's Mako, that if it was on the fire when Shabbos came in, you could return it, even if it was on the floor, even if you're returning to an open flame. Kloimar, in our case of the crackpot, the Tashpeitz would be Mako. It's an open flame. Yerushalmi, once it was on the fire, as it when Shabbos came in, then everything doesn't look like Bivashal. It's all going back to the fire. It doesn't look like Bishal. Now, I would never be Mako on episode for Kach and Ashita that one Sefer brings. Over here it's a Chidah, but it brings a Tashbeit, but it's negative Shabura, negative Taz. I'm going to tell you, Davar Noyer, Rabbi Yisrael. It's also, this is negative the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef says, he doesn't just argue. The Beis Yosef says, Davar Pashit hu. Davar Pashit. He says that the Aruch HaShulchan writes, unbelievable, in Sifyut Tes, Al Zeh Soimchen HaOlam. On this Ran, the Olam is Soimech, that when they take out cholin from an oven, Shalanu, which are heated up with fire, Viloi Garof Mikotam, that they're noitel, they take a little cholin, mamish, all the cases I spoke about today that I said you're not allowed to do, the Berurah says you're not allowed to do. The Aruch HaShulchan says they do it, they take the chicken out of the oven, and then they put it right back. They take the crock pot out, and then they put it right back, even though there's no blech. He says, because they're bound to das yichidah. So now already everybody say, I have an Aruch HaShulchan and a Tashbeit and a chidah, and they're saying if you did this, it's mutter. So the shaila is, do we have to ask the chalent? So this itself wasn't enough for me. So I want to tell you what I found. I found in the Maram Shik in Simin Kuf Yud Zayin and the Marshag in Beis Simin Nun a Rizig Chiddush. I tell you it's a Rizig Chiddush. They say, let's say you learn, listen closely, that the lumdis of the requirement for Garif Vikatim is Shemichata. Let's say you learn like the Rabbeinu Tam, which we saw the Graz learns like. So they say that an unbelievable chiddush, They say maybe the only time there's a Shem Yichata, and everybody's about to change your lives. This is, Mama's changing the last 5 weeks. They say that maybe the only time that there's a Shem Yichata in general is when it's Muchan Lachtois. Kloimar, till now we always said that when you have a fire and it's the normal way to cook, then there's a Shem Yichata. That's it. Chazal made like plugs and whatever. They say, no. He's talking about some like primitive type of crackpot, the Maramshik. He says, maybe the Takana Chazal was when I have coals and I could easily come to stoke them. So then I'll come to stoke. And then there's a Shem Yichata. He says, but what if the coals are covered? Now, again, that today we have a knob and it's with ease. But maybe the original Takana was that when the coals are in a state of Muchan Lachtois, Hagam, it's the normal way of cooking, but which is something against everything we've always said. Kloimar, he's telling you that an oven and a crackpot, maybe there's no Shem Yichata. It's easy to just turn the knob. Yeah, but when Chazal were goyzer Shem Yichata, they were goyzer on a type of a coal, which was Muchan Lachtois. So he wants to say that with this, he's a Miyashiv, the Oilam, they had, like I said, some primitive type of a crackpot or who knows what, right? So then, if it'll come out that a crockpot, if you learn that the chesaron is Mexican mevashal, so then we didn't gain anything. But if you learn like the graz, and the way the graz comes out, mamish like Rabbeinu Tam, remember I said in the beginning, there could even be an afkamina. If you learn that the problem of garvikotim, the requirement of garvikotim is Shem Yichata, so maybe you could say chiddush that there's only a Shem Yichata on coals which are muchan lachtois. Masha'en came when you have a crackpot that, albeit you can just turn the knob, but this wasn't the tzura of the original takon of Chazal, because it's not coals which are muchan lachtois, so maybe there's no Shem Yichata. So that, plus the Aruch HaShulchan that says that the Ran, Kiloimar, the Yerushalmi's Mako, once it was on the fire, even on this T'nai, even on the T'nai of Garfikotim, and it works Gevaldik Rabbeisai. The Graz is learning that the problem is Shem Yichata. So if we can get out of Shem Yichata because it's a covered flame, and the Ran is learning that the problem of Garfikotim is Mechsi, but I could tell you maybe we could say it's not called Mechsi because it was on the fire as when Shabbos came in. When you put both of these together and the Aruch HaShulchan is Mako, so then maybe we don't have to aser the chalent b'di eved. And of course, that would be a terrible tragedy to aser the chalent b'di eved. And maybe we can even be mitzaref a svara that we said 4 weeks ago, that who knows, maybe today on, again, these svaras you don't say only at tzirufim, but we said that our crockpots, what exactly is going on? When you would turn it to high, all you're doing, I mean, you have to know in a crockpot, I'm not as sure, but no, the crockpot it could be, it depends on the crockpot. But in certain crockpots, all you're doing is that what? If the fire's off right now, so what are we afraid? That you're going to turn on a fire? So maybe there was never a gzeir on that. And if the fire's on, what are you doing? By raising it, you're causing it to stay on. So we mentioned once that might be called the grama. These as far as if Doilim remembers, you put this all together. I thought that maybe we wouldn't have to ask the chalent b'diavad. So if they would have other food, the Shabur's psak is that the chalent is aser. But if they wouldn't have other food, so then maybe there'd be a makim to be mako like the Aruch HaShulchan. So this is like, let me make a sikut. What's that?
The other food they have, what they don't have other chamin? Is that in the? I'm
not sure if that would be enough because the takon of chamin, they're going to be makayim, ganz fine. First of all, they had shalom this Shabbos, as you see. That was the whole problem in the first place. Second of all, they have an urn, they have a coffee, they have a this, they had Friday night, they had, I don't know if the takon of chamin means that every single meal you have to chamin. These guys today, the Heinti Gedor, they machen schnitzel, they machen kugel, but if all they had would be a chalent, maybe you should know. I tell you, everybody say I'm batal mavutal. I'm not even offer ve'efer. I don't think most rabbanim would be mako on this. So you should ask them. Mila Maisa, I would be mako on this. It's a marsham. It's a marshag. Excuse me. It's a mamshik. Or chashulchan. I would be mako b'diavad. Avada not to return the chalent based on this cheshbon. But if they return the chalent to not ask the chalent, no, I would think I'd be mako. We're in a case of where they had nothing else.
Mr. Marshag is making away with all the history of the last 100 years of worrying about raising and putting down gases in ovens, right?
Basically, yeah.